Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, CMO at BDEX, along with David Finkelstein, founder and CEO of BDEX. How's it going, David?
Hey, Jesse, it's going well. Glad to be here for another episode, but I am looking forward to taking a week off next week.
Oh,
Not the whole week, but to take the week off from the podcast and
yeah,
spend some time with family over Thanksgiving. So looking forward to
yes.
that.
We will be off for Thanksgiving Day, so that's a good reminder. And this is our 78th episode. And after 78 episodes and knowing you for a couple of years, I finally messed up your name. I don't know if you caught that when I was introducing you. I almost said David. So, but yeah, we're humans here. We're not robots. And we have another really awesome human to introduce you to today. We're thrilled to welcome on Yanay Sela, CMO of Bright Data. He's an expert in leveraging web data and AI for marketing. He brings insights into innovation, data strategies for today's dynamic marketing landscape. So we are lucky to welcome him on. Welcome to the show, Yanay.
Hey, Jesse. Hey, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. Appreciate you joining us here. And we're going to ask you to kick it off and give our viewers and listeners a little bit of background about yourself and a little bit about Bright Data as well and what you guys do for your customers.
Sure. So I've been a marketeer half my life, most of my adult life. I've owned a digital marketing agency, then decided to cross the line and jump into brands. I was the chief marketing officer at Galatea, which got acquired in 2015. Then I joined a company called Appsy, which did mobile app analytics. We were acquired in 2019 by ServiceNow. Then I joined the board of Seeking Alpha, which is the world's largest investment community, as chief marketing officer, and I'm currently the CMO at Bright Data. What else? I also like to teach. I'm a resident professor in a couple of universities in Europe, and I'm really happy to be with you guys today. I really like your show, and I think it's probably one of the most important ones in our industry for the intersection of data and marketing. So I'm excited to have a chat today.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that feedback for sure. And can you tell us a little bit more about Bright Data, just for our listeners' sake?
Sure. So Bright Data is the world's largest web data platform. Essentially, we provide tools for organizations of any kind to collect public web data and structure it in a way that they can make it useful and derive operational alpha, investment alpha, or any other insight that will allow them to gain a competitive edge, essentially. So we're their plug into looking at the internet and translating it into a data set that they can work on and get actionable insights from.
Awesome.
We're about 500 people across the world. I can't say how much money we're making exactly, but way back we passed $100 million of ARR way back. And we're all data nerds at Bright Data. So that's a fun place to be.
Well, you're on the right podcast as well. So let's get into our first topic, which I know leading up to this episode, there was a lot we kind of packed into these this short topic headline of maximizing ROI with Google AI in advertising. So could you kind of kick us off with this and whichever angle you want to take it, Yanay?
Sure. I think AI is obviously the buzzword on everybody's minds, especially marketeers, and I think it's really relevant for 2024. So usually November and December are the hardest months for marketeers for two reasons. One is some of the hopes and dreams that marketeers, which are optimists in nature, had for the year are coming crashing down, looking retrospectively about the year and saying, well, we thought this is going to work, but it didn't, etc. And the second thing is building the budget for 2024. And I think most marketers are asking themselves, how do you not miss this train? How do you make sure that you're leveraging this technology to the point where you are more effective and your competitors are not beating you at it? And at the heart of this, in most companies, I would say, there's a big line item in the budget that is Google Ads, Google advertising. And so Google uh, released, actually way before the AI buzz a few years ago, but now it's obviously full on. They released their AI mechanism. It's called PMax, or Performance Max, or however you want to call it. There's AI aspects in everything that Google does, but this is kind of like the branded type of campaigns that Google Ads will let you run that are based on AI. And PMax is, when people ask me how much money should I, if I'm spending $100 a month on Google Ads, how much of that budget should I put in uh, PMax versus the other campaigns that I'm running? And it's tricky because PMax could be the best thing ever, but it can also be a complete disaster. Mm. PMax is a beast, and when I say beast, it's a very smart genie that gives you what you're asking it to, but it's very easy to ask something that is not 100% accurate. And I'll explain. Um, if you direct Google's AI, if you direct PMax to give you leads, it will give you leads in masses. It might be the worst leads that you've ever gotten, but it's going to get you leads because that's what you're asking it from. And so I think the marketeers, and especially in B2B, but it's true for a lot of in many B2C businesses as well. I think marketeers are always struggling to go one step deeper into the events, and this goes into the infrastructure and how do you even start thinking about it, into the deeper and deeper into the events that you want to get PMax on, that you want to feed it as signals of success. So you should think about PMax as, if you don't have the data infrastructure to be able to optimize for the deepest conversions of your funnel, then you're probably not going to get success with PMax. If you're a business that has a self-serve SaaS platform or whatever, and the bottom line is when somebody puts their credit card and they pay, and the biggest milestone is that when they spend, I don't know, $1,000 in the platform, just spitballing. And that's the main thing that you want to do. You need to make sure that that event and the subsequent events are the ones that are sending the signals to PMax, because anything else would calibrate it towards the wrong direction. How do I know? We've made that mistake exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And PMax is also very good, not just at giving you what you want, but it's very, very good at spending a lot of money until you stop it.
Yeah.
Um, so for companies that already run big budgets, the allure of doing this is really attractive because it's like a sidekick. Who's, my head of performance marketing once said, I feel embarrassed to say it, but it's smarter than me, and I hate it, but I also love it. So it's almost an extension of the paid acquisition team, but it can be the worst extension. Um, so I think the events and the data that you give it would essentially make or break your success. And another small another small note about that, and then I'll pause for a second to see if there's any questions. The scale is really important here. I wouldn't touch PMax if we're talking, thousands of dollars a month in a budget. It's the machine learning algorithms and the whole AI machine is usually good in large numbers. And if you don't think you're going to get to that scale, it's better just to do what your intuition tells you better, um, than to have limited data fed into the mechanism, and then you'll probably not get the most the best outcome from it.
Yeah, I appreciate this, your insight here, because I haven't played with it. Well, the one thing that I do know is that Google's always been really good at building what I would call money vacuums. They're really good at building enough complexity into their ad platforms that it's really difficult. I mean, I'm talking to a lot of people that have used Google Ads in the past, that it's always been really difficult to generate a true ROI from it. And I think Google's done a really great job of building so much complexity that you can continuously test and you can continuously use it. But you're always sort of trying to figure out how to generate, a true ROI from it. I'd be interested to, you know, to understand and learn how PMAX is going to be, is it going to sort of be down that same trend? It sounds like it, right? From what you're explaining, it's like it can be so complex, and if you're not asking it the right questions, and if you're not triggering the right events, then you probably could, end up spending a lot of money and not generating the ROI that you're looking for, right?
Yeah, I think there's a trend in advertising products, and Google is leading it in the past few years, where it looks like, I wouldn't speak for Google, obviously, I haven't spent time in the product team, but it looks like the ultimate goal is to create a black box that doesn't require brands and spenders to make many decisions, because they do foresee the future as humans being the weakest link,
Mm-hmm.
which is the ultimate kind of narrative of AI, right? For better or worse. So they have been making changes to their advertising platforms every few months for the past few years that
Mm-hmm.
essentially are limiting more and more the decisions that campaign managers and paid acquisition specialists, people that manage in those platforms on a daily, the scope of what they can do and what they can't, and always nudge them hopefully towards a better decision, because the ultimate goal for Google is to get you a positive ROI on your campaigns, because then you'll spend more money. It's a very simple concept. So they do think, probably from the product moves that they're making, that they can do a better job than us. It
Mm-hmm.
could be the case, but we're still somewhere on the learning curve, where we did a few months ago in the paid. We have fun in the marketing team at Bright Data. We did a competition between a paid acquisition manager, a campaign manager that was up for the challenge, against PMAX. So they would run a campaign and PMAX would run a campaign, and we wanted to see who would get the better results. And the campaign manager won.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know for how long that competition is going to be determined like that, but it still shows that we might be close, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a big future in AI driving targeting for advertising. And, this is sort of maybe an early iteration of it, but I think we're still in the infancy in making that happen and, be more effective than a human. But it'll get there for sure.
Definitely. Well, I think this is a good place to transition. So I'm going to take us into the second topic, which is what is public data and how are marketers using it? Um, could you take us into this? Because, we need a lot of data to feed the AI, and there have been a lot of changes with public data. So can you kick us off, Yanay?
Sure. So a lot a lot of the conversation is usually about internal data, first party data or second party data or zero party data, but mostly it's internal data that somebody has and accumulated throughout whatever it is that they're doing. um, and the past few years uh, have been almost showing a wave of this new thing that's called public web data, which was there all along, but the importance of it um, and the impact of it is really now blooming. It's really like a curve in adoption. So maybe I'll define what public web data is first. So public web data is a very literal definition. It's any data that's on the internet and is public by design, meaning the person who posted that piece of data, whether that's a personal human being or a company, posted it online for everybody to see, not even behind a login, meaning you don't have to log into any site in order to access this website. That's the definition of public web data. And I think in the past 2 years, I've seen it change decision-making mechanisms, which is that's the thing that is the most interesting in this thing to me is, and the reason why I joined Bright Data, which is it literally the access to public web data literally changes our decisions as marketeers. So, do you guys remember having arguments in the 90s? I'm going to assume that you were an adult in the 90s. Do you guys remember having arguments?
Mm-hmm.
You were sitting down with a friend or a couple of friends, and somebody would make a statement, right? They would say something like, there's only less than 100 million bees in the world, and they're going to be gone by 98. And then another friend would say, no, that doesn't sound right. And you would start arguing, but basically you would have to finalize the argument by saying, well, let's agree to disagree, or let's check out the library the day after, because you didn't have Google. And I know it sounds banal to say, but the fact that Google exists actually changed something in the way that we consume or converse, at least most of us, uh, and and perceive reality. Because this mental muscle that we didn't have in the 90s would be to, okay, let me just get out my phone and ask Google, which is now very, very obvious mental process for us, but it wasn't the case. And public web data is similar in the way that it changes our, at least the marketeers, way of asking questions and answering them, because they allow us to have another step other than let's ask Google. Let's find public web data to answer our question, which is something that, because of data collection technology that has been developing and only came to fruition to the masses in the past couple of years, uh, is now available. So the methodology or the technology to collect public web data has always, in the past 7 or 8 years, have been there, but it was mostly a closed club of software engineers. I'm a software engineer by training. I decided to go down the marketing path because I couldn't sit in front of a screen for 10 hours. But software engineers are the ones that are building bots or scrapers or crawlers, or however you want to call them. And if you didn't know how to write code, you wouldn't be able to collect data from the web. And now, with the emergence of platforms that actually allow you to collect that data without, you can just ask what the data is and without building the code yourself, because there's a bunch of tools that will enable you to do that much easier, sometimes even without any coding at all if you choose, is essentially allowing you to ask yourself, is there data outside when you have a query, a question, a dilemma? Is there public web data out there that holds the answer or that can inform the decision that I'm making, which you couldn't ask up until now? And that is a step in how marketers think. It's a step in evolution. Because today the challenge is actually not getting the data anymore. It's understanding what data you need, and more important than that, it's to be able to ask the right questions. So there's this case study that people always teach in MBA schools, and it goes around, about Sam Walton, the legendary founder of Walmart, right? And the case study is about Sam Walton. He wanted to know how good his Walmart branches are doing in real time. He didn't want to wait for the end of the month or the end of the quarter, whatever, for the official numbers. So what he did is he parked in the parking lot every day a different branch, and he counted the cars coming in and coming out of the parking lot, right? So Sam Walton essentially determined that he asked the question, How are my branches doing in real time? And he went out and collected that data in a way that's old school, but he defined the question. Today it's about asking the right questions rather than not being able to answer them. In most cases, there are still answers that we cannot. There's still questions we can't answer with public web data, but there's a lot of new ones that we can in a pretty clear and quantitative manner, which is, I think, exciting.
Absolutely.
And
So
so I'm
it's
thinking, go ahead.
Well, I have an interesting question with respect to public web data because it's come up recently in the courts, right, with AI. And so what happens in this situation where, I think the future of, ending an argument is not always going to be Google. There's going to be AIs that will, answer these questions for us, right? And a lot of times these questions are answered with data that is pulled out from the public web, but with no reference point. When you do it with Google, and we all do it, right? We exactly like you described it. We want to know how many bees there are in the world. We can go online, we can search that in Google, and it'll bring us to some website that is like whatever the some organization that tracks how many bees there are, and we can find that out. But we get a reference point, right? And that organization gets to say, hey, we're the one that did all this research. Here's the information and the answer to your question. That's not necessarily the case when I go and I ask ChatGPT or Bard or Claude or whoever you want to ask. And so, what are your thoughts there? Like, what's going to happen here? How are we going to deal with this public web data that is being sort of concentrated and aggregated into answers by an AI?
I think that there's just the nature of AI is being trained on mass quantities of data. The most of the data that is relevant for you and I in standard usage, let's say a B2C standard usage, as a citizen of the internet, is out there online and it is public. So legally, you could argue a lot of other levels, but legally, if somebody puts it out on the internet and it's public, it's public to be collected and read by a person or by a bot. There shouldn't be a difference. And I think we humans are very uh, adaptive. So I have I've used GPT, and I would probably miss it very much if it went away at this point. And I think people will look at the next version of search engine results or whatever it is, and the newest tile that Google's going to release that's going to be AI.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, it's going to be 70% good, and then it's going to be 80%, then it's going to be 90, 99, 99.9, as these things go, as is the nature of AI with its exponential improvement. And I think in the end, what will happen is the models will battle each other for how close a model is to your personal research methodology and decision making process is, and you would prefer, it might not be a different brand. It might be, I want Google search version 247 because I've done some online survey by Google and they said, well, that's the search engine AI that we're going to give you because that's how you would do it if you had infinite hours to do it. So I think in the end, it's not one product to rule them all. I think in the end, it's a bunch of different versions by maybe not a bunch of different vendors, maybe just a few, but a bunch of different versions uh, of these models that would allow you to get something that you would be pretty confident is good enough. And the reason I'm using these words, pretty confident that's good enough, because the same way we're adaptive as humans, we're also adapted easily to being pampered and being lazy. And so very quickly, we will probably not want to go back to searching the way that we did and using the interfaces to the internet in the way that we've done before without this training wheel of AI. And if that means that the quality is not 100%, but it's good enough, and everybody has their own definition of good enough, but it's going to be good enough at some point, then I think we wouldn't really mind. And if you see the adoption curve of how this went in 12 months or 24 months, looking 5 or 10 years into the future, I don't think it's even a question. It would look like manual work that is not worth the hassle, or almost something that is artisanal in a sense, and it's just going to disappear.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one example, and I think I've given this example on the podcast before, but I'll share it just because it's relevant here. Is we had a project internally, and we were just trying to get some information. We were trying to figure out, in order to provide a solution for a customer, and they had a list of zip codes, and they wanted to know how many people not lived in those zip codes, but lived within like a 20-mile radius of those zip codes. And so normally, if you tried to figure that out, like that's not an easy problem to manually solve. And I think that if we had to put a staff member on the job to do that, it might take them days or a week to compile all that data and figure out how to do it. I literally asked Google's AI Bard, I literally gave it the list of zip codes and said, can you tell me how many people live within a 20-mile radius of these zip codes? And it did it. And it came back and it said, hey, I found out through the U.S. Census Bureau, and it told me where it got the data from, which was interesting. That here's the population in each of these zip codes, and then I went into Google Maps and I drew a circle around each of those zip codes, 20 miles, in radius, and was able to estimate based on the census data what the population would be. And here's my estimate, and it came up with a number, and it was really pretty interesting that it was not only able to solve the problem, but showed me exactly where it got the data to do it.
It sounds like a fun exercise, and it brings me back to the main thing here, which is, and you gave a good use case or a good example, and maybe I'll give a couple of asking the right questions. So now it's now the marketeer's game is the game of how do I ask the smartest, cleverest, most effective, valuable, helpful question I can ask. So the main thing is now articulating the questions, and that's a muscle on its own, but we'll get better at that, especially now that, like we got better at asking Google things, we'll get better at asking the public web data platform that we're going to use. So you're a marketeer, so there's a million questions you can ask. Let's say, so you articulate the question, what is the perception of my brand versus my competitors? Right? It's a question that every CMO wants to know, every marketeer wants to know. So you ask the question in the most intuitive, simple, connected manner to the core of the value. And then you deal with the how. How do I get it? Well, now it's possible. So is this public information? Probably. Where does this data appear? Let's say on certain review sites, right? G2, Crowd, and Capterra, and whatever. How do I want this data to be structured? Well, I just want all the reviews that mention me and my competitors, maybe even together. That's great. Now, usually here would come, in this playbook would come a bunch of analyses questions like, well, I need to do a pivot table that finds the word pricing and see how pricing relates to me and my competitor, etc. But we just talked about AI. So actually the hard work is again done. Once you articulate the question, you ask, what's the perception of my brand versus my competitors? And you figure out, is it public web data? Great, I'm going to get that public web data. And immediately, well, maybe a few minutes after, you have a data set in your hand of all the reviews about you and your competitors on all the relevant comparison sites that you define. And then instead of doing a bunch of analyst work, you just upload it into an AI LLM model, a GPT, and you asked it exactly that question. And it's going to spit out, based on real accurate data, what exactly is the perception of you versus your brand versus your competitors. So it's as easy, and what I'm describing is a playbook that people do today with public web data. And there's a bunch of other things you can do with it. You can do market research to know everything there is to know about your market, to download that data and then to summarize it again with AI. That's why I keep saying that public web data and AI are probably best friends, because they both make the only hard thing about getting a good answer is asking the right question. You can build a listening machine that will bring the insight back to you to tell me every time somebody online mentions a certain keyword that I think is really important. So you can learn customer feedback, and you can do review mining. What do my customers think about me? Right? That used to be a really tiresome process. You'd have to talk to a bunch of people inside the company, and customer success, and the support, and sales, and biz dev, and everybody who's customer facing, and they all have different things. But if the company is big enough, or it has enough data online, you could just collect that, because there's public web data, collect it as a data set and study that data set with AI or without. And that is the ultimate truth, which is something that we're really always kind of striving for as marketeers, in a world where it's easy to get into the qualitative, non-defensible data. And this is defensible. This is very standard. I had a product marketing manager that I talked to him as part of the hiring process. And without us asking him, he said that he did research on us, which was great. But then he kind of drank, the term, he drank his own Kool-Aid, and he used our platform, and he connected all of the feedback that customers had about Bright Data, and he analyzed it, and he said, here are the gaps that I think I can bring value to as a marketeer, and to fix in the brand perception of this particular line of products. And obviously I was like, okay, that's just, you're in, right? But those are kind of things that you had to be an engineer and write a bunch of code before.
Yeah.
And or you would not even have access to that data. In e-commerce, there's companies that collect their competitors' pricing in real time. Actually, all the big ones do.
Yep.
Because if you're brand X, and you're committed to your customers that you have the best prices, you need to know what brand Y is doing at any given point in time, at any hour of the day, because companies have complex pricing dynamics from different geos on different devices, right? And you can do all of that because it's public web data. You just need to say, that's what I want to collect. And you can get that, and then you can feed it to a pricing manager, or even to your own algorithm that would react with your pricing to the competitor's pricing.
So interesting. I think all the marketers are now going to be heading over to the review sites and grabbing their competitors' data and putting that into the Chat GPT. So before we run out of time, though, we've got 10 minutes left. How might this public data not remain public much longer, Yanay?
Well, it's definitely not something we should take for granted, even though it should be. And the reason is, from a few of the use cases we've discussed, and you guys also shared, it's obvious it has a lot of value. But the data does appear on a certain website, or a few of them. And those websites, especially if those are large companies, have revenue aspirations, and they would love to put a paywall around that data, and monetize it for themselves, or sell it to you and monetize it in just a simple way of selling it. Because currently you can collect it, like with platforms that collect web data, or with tools, or with scrapers, or however you want to call it. And it's totally legal, and it's okay, and it's fine. But of course they don't like it, because it means that you don't pay them for that data, even though the data is it's owned by the people, because the people generated that data, right? So it's owned by the people. And there's a lot of legal battles, and a lot of kind of moves in closing up access to data. We've all heard a bunch of things lately in the past couple of years about the big social networks limiting access to a certain amount of data, and sometimes with excuses of, well, we want to prevent AI to ruin the world or whatever. But it always ends up with with the bottom line of revenue. So they just know how valuable it is, and now they're starting to realize more and more how valuable it is. And now that everybody can collect it, they think there's a big market for it, so they're going to fight for it. I'm optimistic because I think the legal and morality aspect of it is undisputable. It's basic right for business. It's basic right to have access to anything that's public online, and just the fact that people were clever enough to build machines that collect it in scale and not have 1,000 people manually collecting that data, going to each website page and collecting it into an Excel file. It shouldn't matter the way that it's being collected, but it's still an ongoing battle, and it's something that's I don't know if important, but probably something that we need to always have in the back of our mind, because I don't know how that will look like. How will our involvement look like in this battle? Most marketeers will probably never. There's not going to be a vote on it, but it's just important to, as a marketeer, to have uh, your agenda straight about what you feel would benefit your profession as a marketeer and what would make it harder. Um, like the disappearance of third party, or the diminishing of third party data makes our life harder as marketeers. Also,
Yanay, I
maybe
want Yanay, I want to challenge one of your
go
statements.
for it.
Let's see what happens here. So you say that the data that's generated by the people is owned by the people and should be freely accessible to the people. But I'm going to give you the example of like Reddit, for example, because I know Reddit. They made a move to try to limit access to data from their site because, and here's a site where the data is generated by people. It's discussions, it's people sharing information, their experiences, whatever it is. But Reddit has, their business model is that they provide the platform for the conversations. People have the conversations, and Reddit basically, historically has made their money from advertising. And so, that means advertising to people, the people that are, that are on the site and having those conversations or reading those conversations. If we automate a process or an AI comes and pulls down all those conversations and then enables someone to access that information without actually going to Reddit's site, then Reddit is losing out on the revenue opportunity, and that hurts their business model. Can they continue to operate their business if the future is, AIs or algorithms pulling these conversations off of their platform and providing answers to people without the people actually going to the site? And I think that was kind of their reasoning for putting the limitations in that they put in, and wanting to charge a fee to access, by way of an API, the conversations for use of aggregating that data. And so, I think that, there's one situation, there's one, reason that a company like theirs is doing that, because they would cease to exist if they didn't have that ad revenue, coming from actual people using the site. So what are your thoughts there? Like, what's going to happen? You say that, the data should be accessible to anyone, even if it's automated, but there are companies like that, it would affect their existence if it does, come to a point where the data is being pulled, automatically instead of by actual people.
I think it's a valid point. In this particular case, in Reddit's case, there were a few hundreds, if I'm not mistaken, of the people have voted. The people that's their data have voted, and there were a few hundred subreddits that actually shut down in response to this move by Reddit. So the community of Reddit has probably clearly spoken that they believe that this data should be public, and that is a good question about what should moving forward. We know what's been the case up until now, but moving forward, what is the responsibility and or property of these social networks and these digital playgrounds in owning the data or doing something that is in between, because there's a bunch of creative solutions that we can potentially move towards. Anything from rev share, which is on the table, rev share with the collectors of the data, um, which is a distributed model that could actually would end up benefiting more and more to those platforms. But the bottom line is that this train is not going to be stopped. So this data, at some point, if Reddit would not have kind of turn around on some of their main decisions, there would be a new Reddit competitor that would have no problem with public data, and they would get the community in the end. Might not be as smooth, but I think the bottom line is that the people own the data, and the people probably have spoken that though they value the platform on which they can put up that data, it's not the most important thing, especially now that the switching costs are really, really small. And so in a non-monopolistic market, which we're all striving for, because we know what happened in monopolistic markets for everybody involved, other than the top brands that rule it, there's freedom to move. And I think that's going to be of the one of the consideration moving forward for users, for individuals, for businesses. The data is public, and the same way that I want to collect public data for my competitive advantage over a certain market, I have to be able to understand that my data is fair game too. And it's important to stop for a second and note that we're only talking about public data,
Right.
which by definition is data that you put online for everybody to access outside of a logging, without a logging.
Yep.
So that's why I feel really comfortable with this line in the sand.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think there's going to be some sort of combination of all of what we've discussed, in the sense that I'll give you a really bad example. When Cambridge Analytica wanted to buy data from Facebook, Facebook said, here you go, you can have whatever you want, right? I think that there'll be somewhere in between, where I think that you may find that some public sites will be able to figure out which the bots that are coming to their site, and block those bots from scraping data, and be able to come up with a model to give them access for a fee. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Some may have more sort of clout to be able to do that based on the volume and type of data that they have versus others, but it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over time.
Absolutely.
Speaking of time,
yes, interesting time. But yes, we are at the top of the hour. And so in closing, Yanay, would you like to tell the listeners how they could find you if they wanted to contact you after the show?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. It's a small little social network. You might have heard of it. Yanay, Yanay Sela. Any questions that you have about high-level marketing, but more specifically how you can use web data for your marketing, that's my jam. I'm your nerd. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And also, audience members, we hope you'll check out BDEX's Omni IQ. You can simply go to bdex.com, click the try for free button, or you can use this QR code that I'll put up on the screen that we put up every week. So if you've been here before, you've seen it, but it takes you to Omni IQ. And that's our app where you can just simply upload a CSV file of your first party customer data and get gender, birth year, and household income analytics on your data. No credit card required. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear what you think about the app. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. So please reach us at info@bdex.com and share your qualitative data with us so we can make it better for you. And I apologize for covering your face up there, Yanay, but I'll pull the QR code down. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Yanay. This was a great conversation. I appreciate you being here today, and let's do it again sometime.
Let's do it.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.